Somewhere in the world, right now, someone is dying because they're alone. Not from an accident, not from violence, from loneliness itself. That's not hyperbole. It's the data. The World Health Organization has just declared something that would have sounded strange a generation ago. Loneliness is a global health emergency, killing nearly 900,000 people every year. But what makes this a psychology story rather than just a public health crisis is the surprising research on what actually helps, and it's not what most people assume. Here's the part that caught researchers off guard. Simply putting lonely people in rooms with other people doesn't fix loneliness. If only it were that simple. A major analysis of 280 studies found that psychological interventions changing how people think about connection work better than simply expanding social networks. In other words, the solution isn't always finding more people. Sometimes it's changing the story you're telling yourself about the people already around you. To understand why loneliness kills, you have to understand what loneliness actually is. And here's where most people get it wrong. Loneliness isn't the same as being alone. You can be surrounded by people and feel desperately lonely. You can be solitary and feel perfectly connected. Loneliness is the gap between the social connection you have and the social connection you need. It's subjective, it's personal, and it's biological. Humans evolved as social animals. Our ancestors who stayed with the group survived. Those who wandered off alone became someone's dinner. Our brains remember this. When you feel disconnected, your brain interprets it as danger. Real, physical danger. It triggers the same stress response you'd have if a predator were nearby. The body responds to chronic loneliness with sustained stress, elevated cortisol, increased inflammation, compromised immune function. Your cells are literally reacting to isolation. According to the WHO Commission on Social Connection, loneliness now contributes to an estimated 100 deaths every single hour globally. That's nearly 900,000 people annually. To put that in perspective, some researchers argue loneliness is more dangerous than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That comparison has sparked debate, but the risk is real. The WHO Global Report found 1 in 6 people worldwide are affected by loneliness. That's over 1 billion humans walking around feeling fundamentally disconnected. But it's not distributed evenly. Young people aged 13 to 29 are the most affected, with 17 to 21% reporting significant loneliness. This surprises people. We assume loneliness is an elderly issue, but teenagers surrounded by social media and constant connectivity report feeling more isolated than ever. The mental health connection is staggering. 81% of adults who reported being lonely also suffered from anxiety or depression compared to just 29% of those who felt connected. People who are lonely are twice as likely to experience depression, not slightly more likely, twice. That's a risk factor we should be taking seriously, and it affects more than mental health. Lonely teenagers are 22% more likely to achieve lower grades. Loneliness literally impacts academic performance. There's also a global inequality dimension. Loneliness rates in low-income countries reach 24% more than double the 11% found in high-income countries. This brings us to the question that matters most: what actually helps? Because the intuitive answer, just get out more, doesn't hold up under research scrutiny. May 2023 marked a turning point. U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy issued an advisory declaring loneliness an epidemic. It was the first official recognition at that level. Then in June 2025, the WHO Commission on Social Connection released their landmark global report. The numbers were worse than many expected. But the most important finding came in February 2026, when researchers published a massive meta-analysis of 280 studies on loneliness interventions. What they found surprised the field. Psychological interventions, approaches that target how people think about connection, showed the strongest evidence for reducing loneliness. Stronger than simply expanding social networks. Stronger than putting people in group activities. The mind, it seems, is the primary battleground. Why would this be? Here's what researchers believe. Loneliness creates a self-reinforcing psychological trap. And escaping it requires more than proximity to others. When you're lonely for extended periods, your brain starts expecting rejection. You begin interpreting neutral social signals as negative. A flat response feels like hostility. Someone doesn't text back immediately, they must be avoiding you. A coworker seems distracted. They probably don't like you. The mind fills in the worst possible interpretation. This creates withdrawal behavior. If you expect rejection, why risk it? Better to stay home. Better to keep interactions short. Better to protect yourself by not trying. And the withdrawal deepens the loneliness, which reinforces the negative expectations, which drives more withdrawal. It's a trap, a cycle, and willpower alone rarely breaks it. This is why psychological interventions work better. They target the thought patterns directly. They help people recognize when they're catastrophizing neutral interactions. The quote from the meta-analysis is striking. Interventions designed to reduce loneliness actually work, with positive effects found across approaches, but the strongest evidence was reported for psychological interventions. Group-based activities did show larger effects than individual interventions. So it's not that social contact doesn't matter, it's that your mindset when you show up determines whether it helps. There's something almost paradoxical here. Loneliness makes you want to avoid the very thing that would help. And knowing this intellectually doesn't make it feel less threatening. The WHO Commission put it simply: strong social connections reduce inflammation, lower serious health risks, foster mental well-being, prevent premature death, and strengthen community resilience. But this brings us to an uncomfortable question. If society is structured in ways that isolate people, should the solution really be teaching individuals to think differently? Some researchers argue we're placing too much burden on individuals when the problem is systemic. Economic inequality, housing patterns, work cultures that demand constant availability. The commute has gotten longer, the workday has gotten longer. The neighborhood ties that once formed naturally now require deliberate effort that exhausted people don't have. There's debate about whether we're experiencing a genuine epidemic or just measuring and discussing something that always existed. Loneliness isn't new. Perhaps our awareness is. But whether the numbers are truly rising or we're finally counting accurately, the suffering is real. And the research does point toward things that help. So, what does the research suggest? First, recognize that loneliness is a signal, not a character flaw. It evolved to prompt connection seeking, like hunger prompts food seeking. When you feel lonely, your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The problem isn't that you're broken. The signal is working. What matters is how you respond to it. Second, quality matters more than quantity. Research consistently finds that a few deep connections are more protective than many superficial ones. One real friend beats 50 acquaintances. Third, and this is the counterintuitive part, address the thought patterns, not just your schedule. If you expect rejection, you'll find evidence for it everywhere. Ask yourself, when was the last time you interpreted someone's neutral response as negative? A short text reply, a flat, sure. Did you fill in their emotional state without evidence? The research suggests group activities tend to work better than one-on-one outreach. Consider joining something. A class, a club, a regular gathering. Structured connection reduces pressure. The group context matters. There's shared purpose, regular rhythm, lower stakes for any single interaction. You show up, you belong by default. That's different from cold outreach. If this kind of research interests you, hit subscribe. We explore topics like this regularly. Understanding the psychology changes how you see everyday moments. Finally, be aware of the paradox. Loneliness makes social interaction feel threatening. Your brain perceives rejection risk as a survival threat. This is the cycle you're breaking. Recognizing the trap doesn't eliminate the feeling, but it creates a tiny gap between the impulse to withdraw and the action. Sometimes that gap is enough to choose differently. This isn't about forcing yourself to be more social through willpower. It's about understanding what's happening in your nervous system when you want to avoid connection. When lonely people take the risk of reaching out, their stress hormones spike. The nervous system genuinely believes danger is present. That's not weakness. That's biology. This explains why forcing lonely people into social situations without addressing their thoughts often fails. They're walking into perceived threat, their guard stays up. The psychological intervention approach works with this reality. It doesn't ask you to ignore the threat feeling, it asks you to examine whether the evidence supports it. Try this. Next time you assume someone is rejecting you, ask one follow-up question. Text back. Clarify. Often, not always, but often the story we've built is wrong. There's something hopeful in these findings. Loneliness is not a fixed state. The research shows interventions work. The trap has exits. But it requires a shift in how we think about the problem. Not just get out more. Not just be more social. Address the psychology, and the social connection often follows. The WHO Commission emphasized prevention too. They called for building social infrastructure policies that make connection easier, not just treatments for those already isolated. We've built cities around cars, not conversations. We've organized work around productivity, not people. Perhaps the structural critics have a point worth considering. Both matter. We need social infrastructure and psychological tools, societies that make connection easier, and individuals who can navigate connection when it's hard. 100 deaths an hour. The number stays with you, but within that grim statistic is a remarkable discovery. We know it works. We have research. We have tools. The interventions that help most don't just increase contact. They change how we interpret contact. They address the suspicious stories our lonely minds construct. You are not broken for feeling lonely. You are human. And humans evolve to need connection. The signal is working. What you do next is the question that matters.